See, I've been involved with the Kashmir issue for the last 30 years. And I began as a starry-eyed human rights activist, um, genuinely believing that we needed to bridge the gap between the estranged and alienated Kashmiris, redress their grievances, because at that time the big issue was rigged elections by National Conference and Congress Party, and there was real anger that the kind of democracy that was available in Bihar was not being made available in Srinagar. But of course, the Kashmiris would tend to forget that it's their own Kashmiri leaders, the Abdullah family, that were doing the rigging. They were depriving them of free and fair elections. But the manner in which the whole anger was being manipulated was made to appear as if it's all at the behest of Delhi, and Delhi is crushing democracy. So for many years, I too was taken in by this spirit that at least their legitimate grievances should be addressed, and we should try to act as bridge builders. So I stayed very actively involved in writing reports whenever wrongs took place, or conveying their sentiments in the best manner I could. So I was a typical starry-eyed human rights activist. The only difference was that I never did it at the behest of any funding agency. I didn't go on behalf of any government. I went with my own money. I spent my own resources. So I was not acting at anybody's behest. And therefore, when my deep engagement with all shades of political opinion, mainstream as well as separatists, including the extremist Hurriyat leaders, over time convinced me that this was less a fight about democracy and more about Islam, more about making Kashmir into another Pakistan-like enclave. So it was more pro-Pak and less anti-India. And when I say it was more pro-Pak and less anti-India, because if you look at the actual conduct of Kashmiris, those who want guns go to Pakistan. Those who want disruption go to Pakistan. Those who want education come to India in lakhs. They are buying properties in India, they're buying properties in Bombay, Pune, setting up businesses all over the country. Now, if you really are so anti-India, you want secession, well, this is not, you would vote with your feet, you would go the other side, you wouldn't be investing here. So I began to see a certain duplicity in the rhetoric as well as in the actions. And I began to see how in private Kashmiris would say one thing, but their public stance would be altogether different. The fear of the gun has made them all so duplicitous. You know, to expect Kashmiris to now, today, speak the honest truth, stand up and be able to, has become very difficult. Now, one sentence that used to hurt me a lot, that Kashmiris would often say to me कि पाकिस्तान को तो कम से कम पैसा वसूली करनी आती है, वो ज़रूर पे करते हैं कश्मीरी सेपरेटिस्ट को, पर फिर अपना एजेंडा चलवाते हैं। हिंदुस्तान पैसे भी देता है और जूते भी खाता है, मुंह पे इस पे थूका भी जाता है, गालियां भी दी जाती हैं, इनको पैसा वसूली भी नहीं करनी आती। यू नो, आई हर्ड दिस फ्रॉम मैनी कश्मीरीज एंड बिलीव यू मी, दिस रियली हर्ट मी. And I began to look more closely at the conduct of our government. Why is it that it is patronizing Kashmiri journalists, Kashmiri separatists? Now there have been exposes galore that top separatist leaders are getting government security, Z-grade security, all kinds of perks and privileges. Their medical expenses are being taken care of, they are being put up in hotels, their travel expenses taken care of, hundreds of cars put at their disposal for their travel. So why is government patronizing? Not just the state government, but also central government. There are widespread charges that many of these journalists and newspapers get money from ISI, of course, but they also get from Indian agencies. And this started bothering me a lot. Now, why is it that I picked up Shujat Bukhari? The case happened in response to, believe it or not, 3 tweets of mine. It's not as if I wrote a whole treatise, though one could write a whole book, a whole Mahabharat, on the way the Kashmiri press betrays its own people. But I picked up Shujat Bukhari because while most others are openly separatist and they speak in that Islamist language, many others, but Shujat is very clever and uses the human rights framework to direct and to tilt the political discourse in favor of secessionism. He's also a great favorite of all these leftist and foreign funded NGOs. He's a star speaker at their conferences, including at my CSDS. I've heard him say things, outrageous things. Now, I had it from very reliable sources that when Shujat Bukhari, who was at one time bureau chief of the Hindu, when he decided to set up his own paper, he sought help from state government as well as from Indian agencies. I know that PDP certainly supported him. Mufti Sahab was the chief minister at that time, I think, when he started the paper, and he got adequate support from them. But when he speaks in conferences, I've heard him, including in Delhi, he really makes, he presents Indian Army as a fascist force, as a force that is crushing the Kashmiri people. That victimhood discourse is truly offensive. And he wouldn't even spare his chief patron, Mufti Muhammad Said, would present him in very negative lights in the rest of India or wherever abroad he went to deliver his wisdom. And he is invited very often globally. Also visits Pakistan very frequently. Dubai is like second home to him. So when these disturbances started, I had tweeted with regard to Shujat Bukhari saying, while it's well known that many papers or most papers in Kashmir take ISI funding, but some and openly play the Pakistani script, but some like Rising Kashmir who are also getting generous help from the Indian side, from the Indian government, state or central, still sing the ISI tune and further the ISI or the Pakistani agenda. So there were 2-3 tweets because I was really upset at the kind of coverage he was giving to disturbances. I believe responsible journalism involves you trying to calm tempers, not provoke them further. And I'm not saying don't be critical of the government. I'm not saying he shouldn't be critical of the army if the army indulges in some wrongdoing. I'm not even saying that he shouldn't be critical of Indian policy towards Kashmir. But A, it should be factual, B, it should be balanced, and also it should be equally, if you really care for democratic rights and human rights, then you should be even more critical of terror brigades, of secessionist games that are being played at the behest of Pakistan. Because Pakistan is not the best democracy in the world, and its aim in Kashmir is to make a Syria out of it, to make an Afghanistan out of it. It's not to bring greater freedom and greater democracy. So you will never see critique of secessionism, never see critique of Pakistan, you will never see critique also of internal politics of Pakistan, what it's doing in Baluchistan. But the paper is very generous in criticizing the army, building a narrative of demonization, which is unmerited. And I think, having now witnessed for many years now, I think Indian Army and its conduct in Kashmir is far better and salutary than armies anywhere in the world. They are there to help people all the time, not just when there are hurricanes and floods and snowstorms, but in any emergency, also setting up schools, the Sadbhavna mission, being there when all other medical facilities fail. It's the army which provides people help in all kinds of emergencies. It's set up medical clinics because during years of insurgency, the whole system, the government system had collapsed. So who was actually giving succor to people? It's army. And I know it even from the words of Mehbooba Mufti, that whenever we've tried to remove army camps from near some villages, quietly people come and tell us, Naini, please send them back, we feel safer, otherwise terrorist groups run us to ransom. This Mehbooba Mufti told me. I also know it for a fact that when, for example, army set up Sadbhavna schools, the separatists had, because the government schools had collapsed, the separatists threatened people that they would be killed if they sent their children to army schools, and yet people did so. So army is actually far from the unpopular force that it's made out to be. The amount of good work they do is actually more than what the state government does. Now, if you demonize such an army, not just when it makes a mistake, when it does make a mistake, by all means, but at least then be fair-minded in the way you present the whole overall situation. And if you care for human rights, then your paper should take a strong stand against terrorism, which Rising Kashmir doesn't. So it was this angst and the fact that he's so celebrated in the human rights biradari, in the liberal and the democratic rights community, and a star speaker in such their conferences and all, that really bugged me. And in that annoyance, seeing the kind of coverage he was giving to this ongoing agitation last year, towards the end of last year, I tweeted about this double-facedness of Shujat Bukhari and Rising Kashmir. Now, he sent me, in the first instance, it was Manhani ka Mukaddama with rupees 5 crores as the defamation damages to be claimed from me. Asked me to apologize. I refused, and I told him, if you carry this any further, more muck will come out, so better that you forget about it. He said no, he wouldn't. His lawyer communicated with me. I didn't apologize, and I just kept telling him, Bewakufi karoge, it won't go in your interest if you do it. So he kept quiet, but there was no settlement as such. It's not as if we came to an agreement, or that I apologized, or that I retracted my statements. And then what happened is that Tufail Ahmed, who's also Indian Muslim journalist, he wrote a tweet saying, Indian government, I mean, I'm just giving you the rough summary of it. The Indian government seems to behave in very odd ways. It has given rupees 22 crore to just one newspaper editor. And since I knew who he was referring to, I said, of course, everybody knows who it is. It is Rising Kashmir. Though I had confirmed it with Tufail Ahmed on phone. I said, aren't you referring to Tufail? He said, to Shujat. He says, yes. I am, and I have it from very reliable sources. Another very reliable source had told me he had been given 25 crores. Now, I don't know what the figures are. It doesn't matter what these under the table figures are. I can't prove these. But I can certainly prove that he gets the largest number of government ads to run his paper. He has been allotted a flat in the press colony, some land here, some there, lot of perks and privileges, including regular advertisements. Now, if you are running your paper with government money, and government money in state of Kashmir means Indian taxpayers' money, because Kashmir is not generating its own taxes. It gets all its money from the center. And when, for example, he had applied even for DAVP ads, which is central government ads, he even got them. Then for a while he was blacklisted. But he fought and he kept pleading with them to give him ads. Now, a person who openly propagates secessionist politics, he doesn't deny it. Because when I accused him of taking money from this side, from Indian government agencies, but propagating the secessionist agenda, the Pakistan ISI agenda, he didn't deny that. What he denied is that he takes money. So even if as I said, I can't prove payments under the table, but he cannot deny that he asks for and he gets government ads. Now, when we started Manushi, because we wanted to be independent, though I am a proud Indian citizen, but we took a vow that we would not take government ads, that we would not take commercial ads, because they compromise our autonomy. And here is an openly secessionist paper, or one that favors secession. He doesn't deny it. He wants Azadi. What business then does he have to even ask for ads? Let him then generate his own Azad Kashmir resources. We'll see whether he can run the paper with that. So, these tweets then, when after Tufail, I said, of course, we know it's Rising Kashmir. Then he sent me a criminal defamation suit. I mean, this time I got it straight from the court. It was not a lawyer's legal notice, but I got, believe it or not summons. I was told that the Chief Judicial Magistrate, Masarat Shaheen, had issued in the very first instance bailable warrants against me. This happened on 3rd December that his case was heard. Now, anybody who knows courts in India, and especially courts in Kashmir, knows how the cases drag on endlessly. For example, Manushi had filed a defamation suit against Midday way back in 2008. Till date, summons have not been served because the court is dragging its feet over examining witnesses from our side before it even issues summons. In this case, the Chief Judicial Magistrate, Masarat Shaheen Sahiba, on the very first day, on 3rd December itself, she examines the complaint of Shujat Bukhari. She examines 2 of his witnesses whose testimonies are in Urdu, and on the very same day she issues a bailable warrant. In all such cases, under the Indian Penal Code as well as the Ranbir Penal Code, which operates in J&K state, this is a summons case. It does not merit, it's only heinous crimes that merit an arrest warrant or even a bailable warrant. 3 tweets cannot be called a heinous enough crime that in the first instance, without hearing me, she should be. So, it showed clear prejudice. But though she had fixed 24th December as the date for hearing, the notice never reached me till then. So I decided not to appear, because I only heard it from news reports of Kashmiri papers that a bailable warrant had been issued against me. I waited for it to be served to me. So it was served to me on 24th January finally. It was resent or whatever. And 24th January I get a second bailable warrant asking me to appear in Srinagar on 28th January. So just 3 days. Now it so happened that I had undergone a very major surgery at Medanta for removal of a tumor, and I had been advised medical rest. I had been advised that for about 6 to 8 weeks I should take rest, not exert myself. Number two, there are Supreme Court judgments galore which say, and we especially quoted the Bhaskar Industries Limited versus Bhivani Denim and Apparels Limited case, in which the Supreme Court has clearly laid down that if the person against whom defamation case summons are to be issued, if the person is living in a faraway state, is a senior citizen, is a woman, is unwell, and a whole lot of other circumstances, then personal appearance is not necessary. Personal appearance is not necessary at all. It's enough to be represented by your lawyer in such cases, because it does not involve any heinous crime. But if in addition the person lives far away and traveling to the court in another state requires a lot of exertion and expense, personal appearance can be exempted. If the person is a woman, then all the more so. If the person is unwell, that adds to the many reasons why personal appearance shouldn't be required. Now, I had only 3 days notice, but I did send my lawyer, who filed an application for personal appearance exemption, citing all these Supreme Court orders and offering a very sound legal argument. And my lawyer appeared before her, made his presentations, and everybody who was present in that court on that day, on 28th January, at least 4 people of them called me and said my lawyer had really presented a very good case and that there's no reason why I would not be exempted. Now, it's not as if I'm saying I'm not willing to appear or I'm not willing to be tried in this court, though I could have, for the simple reason that there is the issue of jurisdiction. Not many people know that the Indian Penal Code doesn't apply in J&K state. They are governed by the Ranbir Penal Code, which was enacted during the time of the Maharaja Hari Singh. Now, even though a Hindu Maharaja enacted it, but today that Ranbir Penal Code has become an identity prop for Kashmiri Muslims. They refuse to have Indian laws. They want a separate law for themselves. Now, since I have committed the alleged crime in Delhi, how the hell can a Srinagar court try me there under Ranbir Penal Code? I'm not a state subject, and I can only be tried under Indian Penal Code, which you are not willing to accept. So, in the very first instance, there is the question of jurisdiction. We would have argued all that. In the first instance, we said, okay, to respect the majesty of the court, my lawyer will appear. And in the petition that I submitted, I did say that my lawyer will not seek any postponements. He will appear every time, but please exempt me from personal appearance. That was the first step we took. She heard the case, she reserved the order, and on 20th March, she passes an order that under all circumstances, Madhukeshwar, if she wants personal exemption, it will come only if she appears in the court on 3rd April and furnishes a bond, bail bond of rupees 20,000. I am sorry, I was not going to furnish any bail bond because I had done nothing to deserve a bailable warrant in the first place. I only deserved summons. And so I understood clearly that she was acting out of bias. Also, we must remember that Shujat Bukhari comes from a politically very powerful family. One of his uncles has been a very high and mighty police officer of J&K state. One of his brothers is a senior minister in the PDP government, this one as well as Mufti Sahib's government. Lot of relatives. It's a very close-knit and a very, very powerful, influential family. And he has very deep links with separatist groups, with terror groups, which he doesn't even deny. He didn't feel offended by that. Now, for me to appear in Srinagar at a time when Srinagar is daily witnessing mob violence, where security forces are getting killed because of stone pelting murderous mobs, where army itself is not safe, there are grenade attacks, there are murderous stone pelting mobs, flash mobs that appear any time, and given the fact that even the Bar Association of Kashmir has at more than one occasion passed resolutions in favor of plebiscite, secession and all that. In such a situation, I would be walking into a death trap if I went there unprotected. You know, you have a situation where Mehbooba Mufti, the chief minister, has to ask the election commission to postpone elections because she can't even visit her own constituency to campaign for her brother. They can't get out of their own house despite the huge security apparatus they enjoy. And here is Madhukeshwar going, challenging a powerful pro-secessionist, pro-Pak editor. He could easily have me lynched, stoned to death by a flash mob. And while I'm not afraid of dying, but I didn't see any reason why I should walk into a death trap. And moreover, accept the jurisdiction of a judge who was being patently biased, who was giving illegal orders. When you go against Supreme Court guidelines in such cases, then clearly you don't respect law. Clearly you are biased beyond cure. And therefore, I see no reason why I should subject myself to trial in such a court. I must have faith in the court in order for me to take the risk of appearing in bad health, risking all these politically volatile mob violence, and I think as a woman judge, she should have understood this. She should have been more understanding. On the contrary, she was more brazen about her bias. So, I was asked to appear on 3rd April. I decided not to, but I did send my lawyer, who again submitted detailed arguments saying, Judge Saiba, you have misread and misinterpreted the Supreme Court directions. Please pay attention. And what we are asking is not any special favor. It is a constitutional right of the petitioner, and kindly review your order. Of course, she didn't do it, and she issued next step on that very day. Then she issued a non-bailable arrest warrant. This is on the 3rd of April. Now, I was very clear. You arrest me, you just send me to jail, no matter. But आपकी कोर्ट में मैं तो नहीं हाजिर होने वाली. So what options did I have to challenge? We told her in my petition that we will seek a clarification from a higher court, either the High Court or from the Supreme Court, whether your action follows Supreme Court guidelines in the matter. So give us time. She wanted the next appearance within 4 days. My lawyer said, no, you have to give us more time. You can't be, emergency mode में चला रही है एक ही case. If terror accused appear before such courts, तो बेल बड़े आराम से मिलती है. केस 20-20 साल तक लटकता है. देखिए ना यासीन मलिक का केस, ओपन एंड शट केस है. मर्डर्स भी हैं, किडनैपिंग भी है, टेरर क्राइम्स भी हैं. आज तक जजमेंट नहीं आई. कितने साल हो गए? 1990 के केसेस हैं. हाँ, आज तक जजमेंट नहीं आए. पर इसमें तुरंत इतना ओवर एक्टिव, हाइपर एक्टिव. सो ही आस्क्ड फॉर टाइम and the next date we got up to, I think, 5th May or whatever. But in the meantime, then I was advised to seek a stay order, not from Srinagar High Court, but Jammu bench of the J&K High Court. And since we had very strong legal case, we've got for the moment a conditional stay order, because he had put a caveat that in case I challenge the CJM order, he should be heard. So now a notice will be served to him, he's going to challenge it, the long fight will continue. But I am certainly determined to take the battle to its logical conclusion. Now let me clarify, the battle is not against Shujat Bukhari. Honestly speaking, personally I don't even know him. I don't think I have spoken even 2 words to him or exchanged 10 sentences with him. I do know his brother, with whom I have had a very courteous relationship, but I don't know him. I have nothing against him personally. The issue really is continuing state patronage of separatist politicians, of separatist newspapers, magazines, and the Jing-Bang lot, NGOs also. Kashmir has plenty of these human rights NGOs which are front organizations for secessionist groups and for the ISI agenda. And these track 2 diplomacy efforts. By the way, Shujat Bukhari, I know it for a fact, has been on several track 2 diplomacy efforts, believe it or not, on behalf of the Indian government. And on one occasion at least, an army general who was with him on that track too told me that he had to tell him, because Shujat was playing very hanky-panky. This was track 2 happening in Dubai or someplace. Ye bhi ayashi ke naye tarike hain. He had to tell him, Shujat, do you remember you're here on behalf of the Indian government? And why are you acting so hanky-panky? You should be presenting the Indian case. Now, the point is, how can such a person be trusted? I've asked several people within the government and even the army generals, why do you patronize such people? And they say, government thinks kabhi na kabhi kaam aayenge. And I say, kab kaam aayenge? Abhi dekho, look at the situation. It's gone above danger mark. They've never served the interests of India. And it's time we stopped counting on hirelings. Pakistan knows how to use hirelings because it also uses gunpowder. You don't do what they ask you to do, they'll just shoot you. Therefore, none of these people will dare open their mouth against Pakistan. You will see no criticism of Pakistan in either Rising Kashmir or in Greater Kashmir or any of these papers. But they're forever demonizing India. And honestly, I think any self-respecting Indian should now stand up and say, enough is enough. We are willing to accept whatever wrong happens in this society as our moral responsibility. We are there to own up and also correct those wrongs. But we refuse to be demonized for the crimes we're not committing. As far as Muslims are concerned, I challenged them to tell me another country anywhere in the world, including Muslim countries, where they have better rights than they have in India. One country in the world, they will not be able to tell. And point to me one Muslim country, any one, which is not at war with its own people. Shia versus Sunni, Sunni versus Ahmadiyas versus everybody else versus, each sect is at each other's throat. Also, not one Muslim country. There are countries where these internecine warfare is not so blatant, but even there is not a single example of an Islamic country where minorities have anything resembling human rights, leave alone equal citizenship rights. No. Even, when these Pakistanis and Indians go to Saudi Arabia, they are third-class citizens. They can't set up businesses in their own names. They have to work under some Saudi sheikh or the other who treats them like slaves, and they can be brutalized at will. I mean, the laws are so harsh, even if you're a Muslim, but because you're not an Arab Muslim. There is so much discrimination, there's so much suffocation, there's so much repression in almost all Islamic countries. And in India, where they have more rights than even the majority has. You run your minority institutions lawlessly, the government can't say anything. You have the most bizarre personal laws, the government can't say and touch you. You run the affairs of your religious shrines in whichever way you like, whereas all Hindu temples are under government control. I mean, there's so many special rights given. And today the atmosphere is such that, what's called Tushtikaran or minority appeasement. Firstly, to call Muslims a minority is in itself a joke, because there's so many crores. There's the second largest population of Muslims anywhere in the world after Malaysia. We have more Muslims living in India than in Pakistan. Secondly, the population of Muslims in India has increased, not decreased. Whereas the population of Hindus who were left behind in 1947 is decimated in Pakistan. Hindus have been decimated in Pakistan. And none of these secularists will say a word about that. Even as far as Kashmir is concerned, this victimhood narrative is so bogus. I never thought that me, starry-eyed human rights activist, would be saying all this. But, you have to learn. I knew less, and as I got to know them more, I have no hesitation in saying that we were fooled by the victimhood narrative. And if democracy was crushed in Kashmir, it was because the Abdullahs would not allow democracy to flourish. All Kashmiris admitted in private that Sheikh Abdullah, the darling of Kashmiris, was such a tyrant that he could not even stand token opposition against him. In fact, at one point, Nehru had to tell him, Sheikh Saab, ek aad kam se kam token to opposition candidate khada hone dija kijiye. He would beat to pulp anybody who dared stand up against National Conference. People had to go into hiding if they voted against National Conference. He rigged elections even when everybody knew he would sweep the polls, because majority of people still had faith in him, and yet he couldn't stand that much of dissent, even token dissent. And the nationalist congressmen or nationalist Kashmiris were so hounded. Say even Mufti Muhammad Said, why did he leave the Congress? Because itna zaleel kiya usko bhi. Mufti was in his heart a nationalist, and he had very good feelings for Indian democracy. And they would call him Nali ka Keeda, gutter worm. They would call him the filthiest abuses, persecuted all such nationalist families who literally had to go into hiding, or, and I am saying it with full confidence, many of those nationalist families actually took shelter of Hurriyat leaders because the state wouldn't protect them, especially when the turbulence broke out. Now we know very well that the Abdullah family is responsible for starting off JKLF. They patronized Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front, the first terror group. And everybody says it, that the Abdullahs carry 3 flags in their pockets. One Pakistani flag, one Indian flag, one Azad Kashmir flag, and they will wave whichever is more convenient to them. They betrayed their own people, and yet the narrative that the human rights community helped them build, the Pakistan ISI, I think it has actually gained deep roots among human rights groups in India, because they sing the Pakistani song. It's not just Shujat Bukhari's paper. So it's not India which was crushing democracy, and people of Kashmir privately realize it. That's why at one stage, you remember, they dug up Sheikh Abdullah's grave. Security had to be, Indian state had to provide security to his grave because people were so angry with this family. Now the point is that we've had enough of this duplicitous game and this victimhood narrative. Even today, what are the 3 pillars on which the victimhood narrative rests? Number 1, oh, we have siege mentality. So why do you have siege mentality? Because our connection with Pakistan is broken. That road should be open. Oh yes, of course it should be open so that terror brigades can come more openly. That's the siege mentality. They don't want better relations with anybody else. They don't want better relations even with Jammu, leave alone India, where they are investing otherwise. But they want constantly, the idea is that they must have open borders or open, that's their idea of breaking their siege mentality. Second, that they are treated like slaves and they are exploited, or their voices are crushed. The truth is, सुबह से शाम गाली देते हो यार हिंदुस्तान को, अपनी अखबारों में, टीवी मेन स्ट्रीम टीवी चैनल्स में आके, they abuse, they foul mouth, they say all kinds of horrible things. Indian media allows it. Of course, international media loves it. You go defaming India globally, and many of you even take security of the Indian state. Now, what are they afraid of if they are taking Indian security? That means they are afraid of Pakistani bullets. They are afraid of, the same thing happening to them that happened to Sajjad Lone's father, assassinated by Pakistan because he started changing his tune, becoming more moderate. They are afraid of being killed by Pakistan. So what interest does the Indian government have in protecting them from Pakistan while they abuse India and sing Pakistan songs? I mean, this is bizarre. This has to end. Thirdly, see, they will not allow Kashmiri Pandits to return. It's a fact that even Mehbooba Mufti, PDP, are not willing to allow or make the effort to ensure that Pandits can return and reclaim their legitimate space. Not only that, which is even more horrific, no less horrific, that refugees that came from POK area, Hindu refugees from POK, Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir, came in 47. Till date, they are not given state subject. They don't have voting rights. And even PDP will not allow it. Why? Because they say this will change the demographic profile. Just a couple of lakh people maybe. But since 47, And the law says that even their own law of the state says that if you've lived in the state for a certain number of years, you do have states, you enjoy states. But they will invite Rohingya Muslims to settle in Jammu so that the demographic profile changes in favor of Muslims. They will allow Bangladeshi Muslims, illegal migrants, to come and settle there, but they will not allow Hindu refugees from Jammu and Kashmir, the Pakistan occupied. Now, they will also cry foul if, they will not, the law that Maharaja Hari Singh had passed, which is no non-state subject can buy properties in J&K state. It was done at a point we were under British rule and the conditions were very different. Even the British, by the way, were not allowed to buy land, and which is why, you know, the whole business of houseboats. Houseboats started because British couldn't buy land there, so they started living in houseboats. And the houseboats then became symbol of Kashmir. They are actually a colonial relic. ज़मीन नहीं खरीद सकते थे तो लेक में, रिवर्स में, रिवर साइड पे और डल लेक के आसपास उन्होंने हाउस बोट्स अपने लिए बनाई. Now that law is being used to deny any outside person, or if a girl from J&K marries a non-state subject, she loses a property right. Now, it may have had some validity at a point when Kashmiris were not rich enough. Kashmiris are today buying properties, prime properties in Delhi, Pune, Bangalore. Every city and state of India has Kashmiris buying prime properties, setting up businesses. You also see their businesses. Every 5-star hotel, go count 5-star and 4-star hotels. If there are 10 shops there, 6 out of 10 are likely to be owned by Kashmiris. They spread all over, setting up businesses. Now, in such a situation, I think it's time the government told them that if you won't allow Kashmiri Pandits to return, if you won't allow POC this thing too, if you won't allow non-state subjects to buy property in Kashmir, even from the point of view of investment, and who will invest in Kashmir if you can't access land? हवा में थोड़े business होगा. Then, sorry, you can't buy properties anywhere. And I really think we should also press upon the government that those who don't swear by the Indian Constitution, don't swear by Indian laws, don't accept that Kashmir is a part of India, their properties should be confiscated. Simple as that. You're not our subjects. How can illegal citizens, those who deserve citizenship rights of this country, with what right are we going to let them buy property? कम से कम database तो बनाइए in properties का, and you'll be surprised that many of these business establishments could also be sleeping terror cells. They could also be hideouts. They could also be fronts for a lot of illegal things happening. I really urge upon the government to create a national database of the properties they purchased in other states, and if those who purchase them are not willing to sign on oath a statement that they abide by the Constitution of India, accept Kashmir's accession, not just this Kashmir, but the entire POC, because legally India has a right to the full territory, then their properties are to be confiscated. I think it's really important that we do that, and it's also important that the government of India take the bull by its horns. these people keep crying plebiscite. Now, the condition of the plebiscite, UN declared or whatever, UN mandated condition was, Pakistan would withdraw all its forces for 2 years, and then India would also withdraw its forces. After seeing UN monitoring that Pakistan has withdrawn its army from occupied territory, because what the Maharaja Hari Singh exceeded was the whole state of J&K, not just this little tiny bit that's left with us. And then India will withdraw and there will be a plebiscite. Now, we didn't even protest when a large part of that territory was gifted to China by Pakistan. China is an illegal occupation, and the effete Indian government has not even lodged a token protest thus far. It's time we did that. It's time we caught the bull by the horns and said, okay, you vacate that territory, get China out of it, and we will prepare for plebiscite. And in the meantime, these 2 years, I would say, instead of this mollycoddling of separatists, see this stone pelting, this is a murderous strategy copied from Palestine. This stone pelting in Fatada or whatever. And Israel was smart enough to pass a law which said 20 years in jail for anybody who tries to kill somebody or harm somebody by these pelting rocks at them. We don't even have to do 20 years. I would say, no matter what their age, book them as terrorists and don't lock them up in Kashmiri jails. See, once they're there, they have access to all the facilities because Kashmir police is compromised. The whole ecosystem there is so pro-jihadi because it pays to be. It's very risky to stand up to them. So even the police, the bharti you'll be surprised, in the police, in government jobs, in the bureaucracy, these parties, these Kashmiri parties have recruited openly identifiable secessionists. So you could be a professor in Kashmir University being paid a hefty salary from Indian taxpayers' money, but you are preaching secession. You could be in the police, you could be in the government. So many of these known separatists, their children and their relatives are in government jobs. Some of them are practicing even in our Supreme Court. Now, I don't know why we accept this nonsense. So, lock up these kids and don't put them in Kashmir. Send some to Andhra, send some others to, Kerala, far away jails. 2 साल अगर ये उड़ीसा, आंध्रा, केरला, महाराष्ट्र, गुजरात की जेल में रह लिए ना, इनकी दुरुस्ती हो जाएगी. They get away with it because they know there are no consequences. They are going to be treated as innocent or at best misguided youths who have to be embraced. No, thank you. No more embrace. No more capitulation. We cannot take the humiliation of our Jawans, CRPF Jawans for example, being kicked, abused, spat on and actually hit on their faces. Why? Because they have to work under J&K police, they can't retaliate. But army, and that's really where the mischief lies. All these people want AFSPA out. Why? Because then the army will also not be able to retaliate. So it's time that we took tough measures and just lock them all up. Fast track trial of their cases. Stop patronage to those who do not believe in the accession of India. Even weed out such. Make all government job holders sign affidavits and put them all on the website. All Kashmir University teachers, school teachers, if they do not believe in the accession, they have no right to jobs which are being paid by the taxpayers' money. And it's time that, Indian state showed guts. The answer to Jinnah brand of politics is not singing bhakti, Sufi bhajans or Kabir ke dohe or Ram Rahim ki chants. Even our Mahatma Gandhi failed. Even Mahatma Gandhi failed when faced with this jihadi force. And Pakistan, let's face it, is the first Islamic state. What's happening, what ISIS is doing now, and the world thinks it's horrible, they did it in 1947. They massacred millions. They did it again in Bangladesh. The 30 lakhs who were massacred mostly were Hindus. Nobody says that. We talk about massacre, genocide of Bangladesh, but nobody accepts or wants to believe or say it straight out that majority were Hindus. And I think it's enough is enough, and I think it's in one such moment that I decided to say, okay, I'm taking you on, not because I have anything against you, Shujat Bukhari, but I think I represent today the deep rage of Indian people against countless wrongs that India in general and Hindus in particular have faced at the hands of Islamic invaders, brutal subjugation under Muslim rulers in India, forced conversions, what they did to Sikh gurus. At least the Sikhs are allowed to remember in their daily ardas. Hindus are not even allowed to admit, accept. Even our history is being distorted beyond recognition by an alliance of Islamists and leftists. Amazing, Maoists, Marxists, Islamists, all together distorting our history and putting the Indian government on the defensive. I just hope that Modi government doesn't buckle under this pressure and pays more attention to treating jihadis the way they deserve to be treated.